It's been a long time since I've had a session with Dave. It's not his real name, of course. He had stopped attending therapy sessions in over a year, and I was surprised when he called to book a session. He had first come to me a few months after he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia at age 29. His then partner had shared, through a veil of tears, about how his quality of life had deteriorated over the past 2 years. She first became alarmed when he had started to overlook his hygiene, his dressing, not seeming to care about how he appeared to others. He had insisted that he was fine, but then he had withdrawn from his friends and family. He only spoke to her, and eventually started to ignore and neglect her as well. He lost his job, and spent most days holed up in his room, mumbling under his breath or talking aloud to no one. He wouldn't tell her he was talking to. He refused to seek help, despite her desperate pleas. It was only after an incident when he was arrested by the police that he finally began to receive treatment. He had climbed into someone's house and nearly been attacked by the owners when they found him in their living room, sat within a circle of lit candles, mumbling unintelligible phrases over and over again. By the time we were having sessions together, he had been stabilized with medication, but the voice he heard persisted. It was not a part of his hallucinations, he insisted. It was real, as real as you and me and anyone else, he said. I had tried explaining to him about his illness, about how the voice, while seeming real to him, was not really there outside of his mind. I tried to discuss with him how schizophrenia causes these really vivid hallucinations, but nothing could convince him that the voice was but a symptom. In the first 2 months after his therapy sessions began, his partner left him. She couldn't handle his deterioration, and she feared that he would turn violent. That was an unfortunate stigma people tended to have about schizophrenic people. In reality, they were more likely to be victims of violence than the aggressors. I continued to see Dave for a period of about 6 months, but one day, he just stopped attending therapy. He had found another therapist, he had said. I didn't really mind. After all, not all therapists are well matched with their clients, and I was happy that he had found someone who had suited him, who could help him. Now, 1.5 years later, he had called, out of the blue, to request a session. He had been cryptic on the phone, not sharing why he needed a session now. When he walked into the room, I was taken aback by the change in his demeanor, his whole presentation. He looked healthy, well-groomed, and all cleaned up. He had a glow to his face, a light in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. "You look great," I couldn't help but exclaim. "Hi, Doc," he said chirpily, and plopped himself on the seat near me. "Dave, again, you look great. I'm guessing things have been good." "Yeah, I worked it out with my therapist. You were right. I shouldn't resist it. I should work with it." "With it?" "The treatment, these suggestions, those given by my therapist." I smiled and leaned forward slightly. "You were right. I had so much trouble. I was in such a deep, dark place, floundering. And so much of it was because I had been fighting against it. I dedicated so much time, so much effort, struggling against it. But you were right after all. The voice, he wasn't someone I should have fought. I let go one day of my need to control it, to stop it, to get rid of it. I let go and the voice, it became clearer, warmer, and then he took shape. He had taken form before, but it had been a hazy blur, something I tried to ignore, willing it to disperse in my sight. But after I embraced his presence, he took a solid form, and he finally appeared to me clear as day. He looks like a regular guy. He has kind eyes. I sat through his monologue silent, not wanting to interrupt. I have to admit, I was intrigued. Dave smiled and continued. He was there, when you were talking to me. He hadn't shown himself properly then, but he was always there, hovering. He took in a lot of what you said, what I shared, and it turns out he's a really smart guy. He had learned really quickly. I think he did his own research too, because he started having his sessions with me, and he was just like you at first, and how he guided me through my feelings, my thoughts. The therapist that he had found had been his hallucination. It was unheard of, at least not in my years of experience. For a client to hallucinate a therapist, who then effectively guided the client to better mental health, it was incredible. I strained to keep my expressions in check. It worked, more or less. I was able to sort out so many things in the year of therapy that I had with him, and he provided therapy free. No offense to you. He evolved too. He started using techniques that you hadn't done with me, so I think he really did do a lot of research, a lot of trial and error. So when you said you found another therapist, you meant him, the voice that you've been hearing, and the guy you've started to see. I didn't want to minimize his views, his beliefs. I was careful not to call his hallucination what it was. A hallucination. Not at this point. That would only push him away. He nodded. So, you've been seeing this man. Does he have a name? He's Jones. Yes, so you've been seeing Jones, who's been giving you therapy, and you've felt much better ever since. Is that right? Yes, he's been incredible. I've done so much work on myself that he's always been there for me. Not just in sessions. He's there by my side most of the time. He makes sure I take care of myself. He catches my unhelpful actions and the negative thoughts that I have. While he can't really read my mind, not most of the time anyway, but he catches the looks on my face. When I'm down, angry, anxious, confused, whatever, he catches these moods, asks me about my thoughts, and just does therapy on the spot. It's incredible how effective therapy is when it's 24/7. I didn't know what to say. I was flummoxed, entranced, and entirely grateful to get to be a part of this situation. It was a psychologist, a wet dream to get an interesting case like this. I love complex cases, bizarre symptoms, and this was ticking off all the boxes. This isn't to say that I don't care about my clients as people. I do have a lot of empathy and compassion for them, but I'm just often intrigued by the inner workings of other people, and this was beyond fascinating. So, is he here right now, Jones? Yes, he is. He's checking you out, by the way. Oh, he says to clarify that. He's not checking you out in a weird way. He's just trying to get a sense of you, and whatever that thing is that's hanging around you. My smile stiffened a little, and I suddenly felt a twinge of nervousness. The thing that's hanging around me. Yes, that brings me to why I'm here today. Jones, he likes your work, what you do with clients. I think he's been hanging out around you sometimes, checking out your sessions with other clients, learning from you. It's part of his research and development, I guess. I squashed the slight discomfort that had begun to grow. He wanted me to come here today to tell you about some guy, something he's seen hanging about you. He tried to talk to you, but you don't hear him or see him. I didn't know what to say, so I simply paraphrased his words. Jones has been around me and he's seen someone hanging out near me. Is that right? Yeah. He told me that there is this figure he's seen around you on a couple of visits that he's made. He's worried. I knew that it was all in Dave's head, but I couldn't help but feel as if he had trickled ice-cold water down my spine. I shuddered involuntarily, and I tried to hide it, speaking quickly. He's seen someone here with me on some of the times that he's been here, and he's concerned. Yes. Wait. He's telling me to tell you, okay. Apparently, he can sense their auras, others like him. He says that the figure near you emanates something sinister. It feels dark. Something's really wrong with it. I couldn't suppress the sensations that came over me at that point. I could feel the blood draining from my cheeks, my palms starting to sweat. An icy sensation wrapped itself around my neck, making it difficult to breathe. I tried to speak as calmly as I could. This is scaring me, Dave. I haven't seen you in a year and a half, and you've come today to tell me about your friend, your therapist, Jones, whom only you can see and hear. And you've also come to tell me about a figure, an evil being lurking near me, that Jones says he saw. I'm so sorry, this must be really unsettling for you, really scary, and I know how it sounds. But Jones likes you. He wants to keep you safe. To warn you. Oh God, okay. He says it's here now. I push back my emotions, mentally forcing them into a little box in my mind. I took a deep breath. Do you see it too? I asked. No, I can only see Jones. We are connected. This thing, only Jones can see it. What does Jones say that he sees, exactly? Dave looked like he was listening intently, and then his face changed, taking on a look of deepening anxiety. He says it's on your shoulder now, leaning on it, kind of, or perched on it. He can't really tell. Every hair that I had stood on end. The icy pressure around my neck seemed to tighten. I had a sudden, almost irresistible urge to run, to pluck myself from the seat and dash as quickly out of the room as possible. I forced myself to calm down. Dave, you're scaring me, and I know Jones, he's real to you, but he's not real to me. And what you're saying to me, though I know you mean well, it's making me really uncomfortable. Yes, that was it. It was all his hallucination. I knew it. Research knew it. Science was on my side. Dave was having an incredibly elaborate hallucination, a delusion, and intricate as the story was, that was all it was. A story. Something he had built up in his mind. His amazing, complicated mind. But still, it was nothing more than his imagination. I held on to that train of thought like a shield, and felt somewhat comforted. The surety of science made me feel safe again. A touch of sadness split into the anxiety that was painted on Dave's face. Then he seemed to be listening, looking somewhere to my right. Jones said that last Friday you were wearing a blue sweater, and you were rushing into the clinic, and you just made it on time for your first appointment. A crack appeared on my mental shield. I had indeed been wearing a blue sweater last Friday, a sky blue one. I was also almost late, and I had been in a huge hurry that morning. Were you following me? Were you waiting outside? I asked, clinging onto the shield. Dave paused for a while, looking again at the empty space near me. You did some chair work with your first client. He told you about his experience with his mom when he was 6 years old. The mental shield disintegrated. The cold fear seeped through. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Jones says that he's sorry. He knows there's client confidentiality involved, and he shouldn't have been sitting in on all those sessions. But he's hoping to make up for it by helping with you with that thing with you now. I couldn't contain the dread any longer. I gave up on my professionally calm demeanor. What is he afraid it would do to me? He says that it's draining your energy, depleting your life force. He's not sure how it works, but just by being in your proximity, it's feeding on you. Jones says that some of these creatures may even have the ability to plant thoughts in your head, influence the things that you do. He's heard of one which made its victims kill someone before killing himself. I stared blankly at Dave. Jones said that he could try to reach out to it and get it to leave, but he's not sure that it could work. Alternatively, Dave trailed off, and anxiety danced on his features. Alternatively what? He said that he could stay with you for a while. He wants to know if you would let him in, let him show himself to you. He could then guide you on what to do. Apparently it feeds on you mostly when you're unfocused, distracted, when your mind is in shambles. Jones wants to be there to monitor when that happens, and keep you focused, strong and clear in thought. He thinks that eventually, if you're consistently being purposeful, clear-headed, it will leave and find an easier target. I couldn't help but chuckle nervously. He can be transferred to me, and a clear head stops that thing. Yes, Dave said. I don't want to lose him, but I think I can do without him for a few days, maybe even a few weeks. Would you be willing to take him on? The conversation was getting out of hand. Not knowing what else to say, I just nodded, and Dave nodded in return and closed his eyes. When he reopened them, he asked, "Do you see him now?" With trepidation, I turned to look around the room. A flood of relief surged through my body as I realized I saw no one. There was no one. I had been pulled into Dave's delusions and hallucinations, somehow buying into his stories, falling for the intricate tale his mind had concocted. This was ridiculous. I was a professional, a psychologist. The tension seeped from my heart as I turned back to Dave. I resumed my previous professional manner. Dave, there's no one. I don't see anyone here. I don't hear anyone either. Dave's face fell. You can't sense him. He's right there. He's looking at you. I can, Dave. He's what you see. I don't see him. Others don't see him. He's there, really. Maybe it takes a while. Maybe it works differently for you. Me and him, we're naturally in tune. Maybe you're not on the same wavelength. I nodded, not wanting to push him too far. Dave, our hour is almost up. Thank you for having been so honest and open with me. I would like to invite you back for another session soon. Would that be okay with you? Dave seemed resigned, but he eagerly agreed to set another appointment in a few days' time. He seemed sure that I would be able to see his truth soon, mixed in with my relief. I also felt a deep, heavy sadness as I bade him goodbye. He was deeply ill. He was entrenched in his delusions, and his hallucinations were becoming stronger, much stronger than when we had first met. He was so steeped in his beliefs that it had swayed even me. I wasn't sure what I could do for him, other than continue to suggest that he revisits his psychiatrist to titrate his medication. I felt incredibly drained after the eventful session with Dave. I powered through the remaining sessions that I had with other clients, and gratefully piled myself into my car at the end of the long workday. I nearly fell asleep at the wheel, but managed to get home safely with the help of heavy metal music. Finally, I could relax and eat my dinner in front of the TV. Just some brainless binge watching ahead. I was microwaving my frozen dinner, hungrily counting down the seconds on the display, when I caught a glimpse of movement to my right. I turned and let out a scream. My heart leapt into overdrive. There stood a man wearing a mustard-colored blazer, a gray tee, and jeans. He had tousled hair, brown eyes, and a weathered complexion. He stared at me in concern. "I'm really sorry to have startled you. I wasn't sure how else I could have approached you." "Who are you? Get out of my house," I yelled, scrambling to grab my mobile phone. "I'm Jones," he said, in a voice as clear as the crinkle on his forehead. I sputtered. "I don't know what kind of sick joke you're playing, but..." I heard fumbling at my front door before it burst open. My neighbor and close friend stumbled in. We had exchanged keys to our houses before, just in case of emergencies. Are you okay?" Her face was etched with alarm. "This man," I pointed at Jones, "he's trespassed in my house." "This man?" She stared at me, uncomprehending. "What man?" I stared at her and at Jones. She followed my gaze and then looked around. "Are you okay?" Hey, no one's here. It's just us." I sat down on the floor with a heavy thump. She came up to me and hugged me. "Are you good? Hey, let me call someone. It's going to be okay." Jones just stood there quietly. I stopped her from making the call. I made it some excuse about being drained, tired, and on medication. About how that must have just made me see things. I just needed to sleep, I told her. And I ushered her out of my house. I couldn't afford to be seen by others as having lost my mind. My career was at stake. She was puzzled and concerned, but didn't push. She agreed to leave, but was firm that she would check in on me again in the morning. The minute that I shut the door behind her, he spoke. "It's still here with you. It's grasping onto your back. I think we need to get started on getting rid of it."